A dramatic twist in the Syrian conflict. The US strikes an airbase, firing its first salvo against the regime in the 6-year civil war. Will this response to the Khan Sheikhoun chemical attack have a decisive impact on the unending violence? How will this affect US-Russia relations? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Nick Clark and welcome to Inside Story. A limited strike with wide consequences. The missile attack is being seen as a message for the Assad regime, deterring it from repeating Tuesday's horrors of Idlib, which saw at least 80 people killed.
Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. There can be no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons, violated its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention, and ignored the urging of the UN Security Council. Years of previous attempts at changing Assad's behavior have all failed, and failed very dramatically.
Well, the US intervention may come as a shot in the arm for the Syrian opposition, reeling under a government offensive backed by Russia in recent months. Moscow's response has been swift, calling the US intervention an act of aggression. The UN Security Council has met at Russia's request. Allies rallied around to support Trump. The military action could be a masterstroke in deflecting the growing criticism at home. Well, let's take this on. Joining us today, first of all, from London, Haid, Syria researcher and associate fellow at Chatham House. Welcome. From Washington, D.C. by Skype is Ambassador Kurt Volker, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. And from Moscow, we're joined by Pavel Felgenhauer, a Russian defense and military analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Pavel, if I could start with you in Moscow. Did you see this coming?
Well, I believe that this is possible, actually, that if there will be an American response, and the Trump administration could see that as an important way to demonstrate its capabilities and its firmness. It would be, of course, a cruise missile attack. That's the weapon of choice. If you begin an attack at well-defended targets, and don't want to risk American lives.
So you wouldn't think that President Putin was necessarily taken by surprise by this?
Well, it was, any specialist would tell you that that is possible. The most believe that the Trump administration will just issue one more serious warning of consequences to Damascus. But this apparently under siege in America, and with a totally disastrous first 100 days, Trump decided that now he can act, and this would bring him, well, a lot of political capital. And
well, those are all
right
things.
thing at the same
those
time.
are all things, Pavel.
So
we're going to be
win-win situation.
We're going to be discussing all of those things as the program goes on. Ambassador Volker, if I can come to you, the question is: well, the White House says this is a one-off. Is that so?
Well, I think at this point, yes. But that doesn't mean it'll be the only one-off, depending upon what Syria does in the future. I think it's a shot across the bow on the use of chemical weapons, that crosses a line and is unacceptable. I think that's very constructive. I think it is also meant to show others in the world that the Trump administration is prepared to take action if needed. Hopefully it's not needed. And so I think that's also a one-off from that perspective. Finally, I think it's interesting, Secretary Tillerson and Foreign Minister Lavrov are meeting today. And I think that it's a salutary thing for that discussion, because it's going to signal to Russia the U.S. is prepared to take a tougher role in Syria, and we'd like to work together with Russia rather than see ourselves in opposition to Russia.
Okay, well, let's hear now from the Syrian government point of view. The Syrian military is saying that the US strikes violate international law and encourage armed groups to use more chemical weapons.
The justification given by the United States with the pretext of use of chemical weapons by the Syrian army in Khan Sheikhoun without establishing the facts and identifying those responsible will send out the wrong messages to the terrorist groups and encourage them to continue to use chemical weapons in future when they suffer losses on the ground. This act of aggression aims at undermining the Syrian army's capabilities in fighting terrorism.
And for the opposition, well, the special representative to the US and the UN from the Syrian National Coalition told Al Jazeera that he hopes the United States action will be a game changer and eventually help end the conflict.
We welcome these strikes. We think they are first good steps, but we would like them to be part of a bigger strategy that would put an end to the mass killing, to an end to impunity, and eventually we hope that they would lead to the kind of political transition that both the Geneva Communique, UN Security Council resolutions advance, and from our point of view, there is no role for those who committed these horrible attacks, including the use of chemical weapons against Syrians, I mean Assad.
Okay, to Hayed, what are your thoughts? Is this a game changer, this event?
Well, so far it has been clear that it's not a game changer because it's a one-time off, and unless there is more pressure on the Syrian regime in order not only to stop using chemical attacks, but also to stop attacking civilians and commit atrocities against them, and pressure the regime to also compromise and accept a political deal that is widely accepted, then this will not change the dynamics on the ground, neither the dynamics behind closed doors.
And what do you make of the Syrian government's argument that this will encourage more use of chemical weapons, or will encourage use of chemical weapons by armed groups?
Well, so far, all reports and even footage that have been broadcasted widely indicate that the Syrian regime is the one behind the chemical attacks. Some reporters from The Guardian went there and examined the location themselves. The US, before they launched the attack, they also showed that the Syrian regime is the one behind the attack. So all indications basically indicate that the regime is the one behind the attacks, and that will not basically encourage or allow opposition groups to basically do or carry out chemical attacks because they don't have them.
Ambassador, presumably Assad and Syria's military chiefs, they too would have been taken by surprise by this event. They wouldn't have been anticipating it, would they?
Well, first off, they know what they did. Second, they probably wanted to test where the U.S. administration is. I think they felt that with Russia's support overall, and Iran's support overall, and the United States focusing only on ISIS, that they had something of a green light to really pursue an aggressive attack against the opposition. So I think they were testing. And I think they may have been surprised by the speed and the strength of the response, but now they know that. And hopefully that will cause them not to pursue that course again.
Okay, well, we'll chew over that in a minute. But everyone, of course, is watching Russia very closely. And Russia's foreign minister, that's Sergei Lavrov, says that the U.S. action undermines attempts to find a political solution.
What happened will benefit those who want to undermine negotiations in Geneva and Astana and create a pretext for a shift from a political solution to the military change of the regime. It all further damages the US-Russian relations. I hope this provocation will not lead to irreversible consequences. We will have to make our conclusions about the future relations with Washington.
Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow, before we get into the nitty-gritty of that, I just wondered, there's one thing I just want to try and clear up, that Russia has at play in Syria very sophisticated air defense missile systems. Why do you think they weren't put into play?
Well, the problem is that the capabilities of those systems were a bit overblown by kind of promotional different kind of papers. These systems have been deployed to defend the Russian bases in Khmeimim and in Tartus. against different kind of attacks. And say cruise missile, the best they can make is maybe a radius of 40 kilometers. It depends on the terrain. They cannot possibly defend the Syrian-based outlying base at all. So it's not that the Russians didn't want to use them, they couldn't use them. They were not put there to be used in different other parts of Syria.
So as we heard from Sergei Lavrov there, Russia clearly not happy with the situation. We've seen Russia suspending military communications on the ground. Are we going to see further reaction, do you think?
Well, it's not on the ground, it's the communication between the two militaries to avoid clashes. I believe that's a political statement. Not that the Russian military or the American military want to clash with each other, really. But this statement is aimed at the American public, at the American Congress, that if this is not a one-time event, and that's the main fear in Moscow, that this may not be a one-time event, that this could be the beginning of a sustained campaign to take down Assad, to create no-fly zones. And then Russia says, well, we may begin to kind of militarily intervene, that there can be clashes. There's the growing risk of a Russian-American direct confrontation, which no one wants, of course, because that could escalate into something nuclear. So that's a political statement. I don't believe that right now we're really moving into the period where Russian and American fighters will be fighting each other in the skies of Syria.
Right, Ambassador, and that's the thing, isn't it, that neither Russia nor the United States will want to escalate this, one assumes.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I think what we have is a U.S. that's concerned about ISIS, a Russia that's concerned about its position in Syria, an Assad regime that has become a problem in that relationship. And I think this now opens a pathway to discuss what's really going to happen after ISIS going forward. How do we settle Syria?
And Haid, Russia says that it's not tied to the Syrian regime. How concerned will President Assad be now about Russia's position? Do you think anything will have changed in that relationship because of what we've seen in the last 24 hours?
I don't think that anything has changed in the relation between the between Russia and the Syrian regime, because as everyone said so far, it's a one-time thing, and as long as it doesn't escalate into a wider conflict, I think the Russians will continue their support for the Syrian regime, and the Syrian regime will continue its war against opposition groups inside Syria.
And Haid, do you feel that this military action that we've seen and this kind of threat of military action may just hang in the air a bit and provide some impetus to the diplomacy that we've seen fail time after time after time, but it might actually give it some momentum now?
It will be difficult to see how one strike will be able to change the dynamics and force Assad or pressure Assad to basically compromise. I think for that to happen, we need to see a wider strategy that aims not only to conduct targeted attacks against the Syrian regime, but also to increase the support given to rebel groups on the ground in order to make advances and threaten once again the Syrian regime inside Syria.
Ambassador, what are your thoughts about that? As far as diplomacy is concerned, will this have any effect on ongoing talks?
Well, I think it will. I think it will. I think until now, the United States has been focused only on getting rid of ISIS, really not caring so much about what comes after in Syria. Russia, meanwhile, has been backing the Assad regime very strongly together with Iran. I think this is now all in play again. I think the U.S. is starting to see that you can't have a stable solution in Syria with Assad in power or trying to control all of Syria. I think Russia has in the past indicated its interest is more in the regime itself and its access to bases in Syria as opposed to Assad as a person. And so I think there is now some room for dialogue between Russia and the United States over what a solution starts to look like.
Right. Let's move on to the Donald Trump and the domestic situation. From the U.S. perspective, this has undoubtedly been a win-win for Donald Trump, and perhaps Pavel Falkenhauer deflecting from his current tricky domestic situation. Is that how Moscow might view the situation?
Yes, of course, absolutely. I mean, things happened also in Russia, say, with the annexation of Crimea in 2014, which is an enormous boost for the popularity of Vladimir Putin. He would understand such action and would basically could agree to tolerate it. But there should be deals, and when the Secretary of State comes to Moscow next week, the Lavrov and, of course, primarily Putin will try to kind of begin to strike some kind of lasting deal on how the spheres of influence fall in the Middle East, giving and taking. That's how Russia will try to move and maneuver the United States, the Trump administration, in the future Syrian political settlement.
Of course, Tillerson knows Putin, doesn't he, Ambassador? How might that meeting go, do you think, after what's just happened?
Well, I think the Russians will clearly express concern. There's no question that they'll say they're unhappy about these strikes. I think Tillerson will say, well, that's the consequence of the sort of actions that we saw. Now let's talk about what to do. And I think on both sides, they respect strength, they respect each other, and I think they'll be able to talk through it.
Hyde, were you surprised about this sudden change in position? Because just days ago, the Trump administration was saying that effectively that Assad should stay, and now they've just done a complete 180-degree turn. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely, I was surprised to not only see the change in their verbal position, but also to see an airstrike targeting the Syrian regime inside Syria. But again, I think the U.S. administration made it clear enough that this is not a change in their policy towards Syria. Their priority remains to eliminate ISIS before they are considering changing anything else. And as long as that is still the policy, then it's quite difficult to imagine how the political talks will progress quickly if they don't change the way they're dealing with Syria right now.
And it's interesting, isn't it, this dramatic about turn. It's certainly different when you're in charge. Let's have a look at what Donald Trump himself said on his Twitter account about President Obama when US action against Syria was in question back in 2013. He said, what we will get, there were 3 tweets altogether, but what we will get for bombing Syria besides more debt and a possible long-term conflict. Obama needs congressional approval. And another one just days later, on the 3rd of September, he followed up with, what I am saying is stay out of Syria. And then on the 5th, and in capital letters, he added, again to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen. And from that fight, the US gets nothing. Ambassador, this is the man who has launched, 59 missiles on Syria?
Yeah, well, I think it shows that he's now the president as opposed to someone standing on the outside. And I think he's also very concerned about perceptions of strength. In contrast to the way it looks overseas, I think he's actually happy with his domestic political popularity and perception right now. He feels that he's fighting this failed establishment. Even if it's a minority insurgent fight, he's happy about that. And he wants to show strength. And I think also internationally, he wants the U.S. to be seen as strong. So that's where I think he is right now.
Pavel, give us an indication of what Moscow might be thinking about how they deal with Donald Trump, because he's certainly not the man they thought they had when they had that conversation back in January. He's very impulsive, clearly, very unpredictable. You don't quite know what he's going to do next, do you?
Well, I mean, you can, of course, you can understand what the American Trump are going to do next when there's an opportunity to show strength. And there's a good pretext to do it, very popular internationally pretext. Well, he went for it. He's an opportunist, and he has a good political instinct to act when you have to act. Dealing with him, yes, there'll be problems because right now, after so many years after the end of the Cold War, Russia's really depleted in good specialists in American politics. So we don't fully understand what's happening in Washington, D.C., and sometimes make very serious blunders in that misunderstanding. Hopefully, maybe there'll be some good advice given to President Putin how to deal with Trump and what to expect of Trump.
And Ambassador, with this turnaround from Donald Trump, President Assad has apparently lost a big pillar, which was it seems, supporting his tenure in Syria. What do you think what's happened now means for the future of Assad, given the heinous crimes that are being committed that could, in effect, make him a war criminal?
Right. Well, I think there will certainly be, after the fact, accusations and investigations as to whether he personally ordered this, and therefore whether he personally is a war criminal. The action itself, the deliberate attack on civilians and the use of chemical weapons, are themselves war crimes, but assigning that blame personally would be the result of investigations. As for his future, I think there are a couple things. One of them is I don't think we're going to see more use of chemical weapons anytime soon. Second, I think Assad will not be in a position to govern all of Syria ever again. The question is only whether he remains in charge of a smaller part of Syria or whether he is removed personally and there is an Alawite portion of Syria governed by Alawites but not by him.
And Haid, do you think that this change, this apparent change in policy from Washington, will change as well the way Assad proceeds to conduct the war, or will he just carry on in the same way?
I don't think that Assad will change the way he's conducting the war in Syria, because chemical attacks are only one type of the different attacks that Assad is using inside Syria. And as long as the focus of the US administration is only on preventing Assad from using chemical attacks, but still allowing him to continue using different types of indiscriminate attacks against civilians, then Assad will continue to basically advance inside Syria and commit atrocities against civilians. And the problem here is that, once again, we don't want to repeat the same problem. The US administration in 2013 only focused on how to take away the chemical weapons from Assad, but allowed Assad to continue killing civilians. And if the current administration will do the same mistake by only preventing Assad from using one type, while allowing him to continue killing civilians using all different types, then we will not see any change, unfortunately.
Pavel Felgenhauer, this has happened, it's taken place, and it's had a lot of support from around the world, including Turkey, who are now calling for more action to be taken. As time goes on, and if this is right, if what Haid is saying is correct, and President Assad continues to commit these atrocities, the pressure will grow on Donald Trump to intervene again. Do you think he is likely to respond in the way that he has?
Well, that maybe more depends not just on Trump, who of course gives the go-ahead, but on his advisors and his military generals. Will they want to get deeper involved in Syria? It's right now unclear because, of course, I mean, a one-time attack, yes, spectacular, brings a lot of political capital, though the military results of it, well, are not that serious. This does not really diminish for any length of serious time the capabilities of Assad to continue to fight his war of attrition. So will the United States be ready and to take on, say, Russia, not only Iran, but also Russia inside Syria over the future of Assad? I'm not sure. Moscow is going to put the point that Russia is right now supporting the present Syrian regime, and Russia has invested enormous amounts of political capital and material resources and money into beefing up the Syrian regime, helping it to win the civil war, and Russia does not want that. Putin does not want those investments to go down the drain.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Pavel. We do appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed. We have run out of time on this important issue. Thank you to all our guests, to Ambassador Kurt Volker, Haid Haid, and Pavel Felgenhauer there in Moscow. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, just go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, it's goodbye for now.